Hey there, it's Carly with the Expat Focus podcast. Have you ever visited a city or a country and just known deep down that it's where you were meant to be? This is what Steph Zakas experienced on her first visit from the USA to Iceland, and it's the reason why she's living in the country today. Now, Steph is a true slashie. She's a coach, an advisor, a consultant, a photographer, and in this chat, you'll find out how she made Iceland her home, what it's like to live in a country of such extreme contrasts, so much darkness in winter, a sun that never sets in the summer, how Steph thinks that contributes to such a creative society. You'll also learn that if you do come to Iceland, you shouldn't treat the place like Disneyland. Steph, I hear that Iceland is a bit of a hotspot for creativity.
Mm.
What do you think it is about the country that really gets those creative juices flowing?
I actually think it's like a perfect combination of a lot of things. So I think because we have, first of all, the nature, obviously. So it's so inspiring and it does this thing in your brain when you're out in nature and your parasympathetic nervous system can kind of engage and like you basically can kind of like let down that like survivor mode wall for a minute and your like creativity can flourish. But I really think it's our landscapes how open they are. We don't have a lot of trees, so it's kind of like this big, vast, like you get to feel how small you are in the universe kind of thing, which I think is always kind of inspiring. And then our community is so small. So we have very little people here, and the arts are very much supported just in the culture itself and within our government and everything like that. So I just think it's like this mix of the community and the nature and living in Iceland in the weather because it is interesting. It's unpredictable. You kind of have to just live with it, right? So there's no like fighting it. So we have a lot of, I would say, kind of like downtime a little bit where it's maybe really gloomy and rainy or in the winter when we don't have sun. So yeah, I think it's a combination of those three things.
It's funny you mentioned that Iceland doesn't have many trees because I did visit Iceland for a couple of weeks back in 2019. And I remember one of our tour guides saying that if you ever get lost in the nature, you just have to stand up.
Stand up. Exactly. Yeah, we don't have very many. We have a little like reforested areas that do have some forests, which is fun. I love taking people in them because they're like, "What? I didn't know this existed." But yeah, for the most part, it's just stark openness.
The
Yeah.
landscapes there are truly just
Hmm.
incredible. And we drove the ring road over 4 or 5 days. It was very quick work.
Yeah.
But just like the nothingness that transforms into something else after several kilometers, you're going through black lava landscape and then suddenly it changes to something sandy with beautiful colors and then it's green. It was just
Yes.
amazing.
Hmm. It's my fave.
But first of all, let's start with how you, as an American, came to be living in Iceland of all
Yeah.
countries.
I know. So it wasn't in the books. Like it wasn't something that I like grew up thinking like I will move to Iceland, but I've always had this push to leave the States if I could. But it wasn't really like a thing that I thought I could ever, like realize. But I grew up in the States in a landlocked middle of America state. So I didn't see the ocean until I was in my 20s, and I just like I don't know. I've always had this like idea to get out, which I did, which was great. But then when I was living in New York, my best friend from high school growing up in Ohio, she messaged me and she was like, I'm going to Iceland in like a few weeks. It was middle of February, totally like winter. I was like, yeah, of course, let's go. So I've been like interested in Iceland as far as the like, Lord of the Rings and like a lot of like folklore and like, National Geographic. I'm like, that looks freaking nuts, right? But I never really thought I would ever live here, but on my first visit here, it was like my life changed. It was so nuts. I'd like never had this feeling of home before. And at that point, I'd lived in three different states and like I just I don't know what it is. It was literally like I'm not really religious or anything, but I have this like spiritual, just like this is where you belong, and it was so strong. And ever since then, I was just like, I have to be here. Like this is where I feel peace, and I had never felt peace before, and so I just, yeah, I just kept coming here basically. And I made a lot of connections in the community, and I was doing art out here. Photography out here. And eventually, yeah, I got to move here. I decided to just, I said, F it, and I'm gonna try to get a visa so I can live here and work here, like get paid money. Because at that point I was just like trading. So a like marketing, I would do marketing photos for like a travel, like a tour group kind of thing, where they would fly me out, and for free I would
In
do,
exchange for a
photos.
trip.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I
Mm,
wasn't getting actually like paid, for
yeah.
anything because that's illegal. But I was like, I was here all the time, like constantly, like every 10 to 14 days for a
10
few
to
years.
14
Yeah,
days.
I was like counting my like Schengen, dates and like making sure, and I would like pop into the UK for a few days and then like come back, kind of thing. So anyway, so I said, I'm just gonna try to get my visa. I know it is far-fetched because I'm an American and I'm not being sponsored by a company. I'm not being sponsored by a husband. So I went for it, and I ended up, it was a really long process, and I had to show every magazine publication I've been in, every lanyard I had, like shooting for like New York Fashion Week, every every magazine I'd been even just assisting on, because I did a lot of work with like Vanity Fair, Vogue, uh, Paramount, like all these big studio stuff. So I had like a huge, like it was a trash bag full of stuff that I had to
Gigantic
scan and like
dossier.
bring in. Yeah, huge. And then I had to get letters of recommendation from the community, from artists I've worked with here, where I did their like album art for, their CDs. I guess it's not CDs anymore. I'm old. For their
Me too, don't
albums.
worry.
Yeah, great. So all of that, and people that I've like, done photography for here, they wrote letters of recommendation in Icelandic, and I also got letters of recommendation from like celebrities I've worked for in the States, and then they granted it to me. So I'm a special artist, is how I got in here
Right, so
to
that was
start.
the visa you went for was
Mhm.
like an artist visa.
Artist in special skill, yeah. So that's what I did, which is kind of like not normal. It's very rare. Like I don't know if other people have it here. I'm sure some other people do, but
I know an artist type visa exists for the USA. So is
Mhm.
the artist visa for Iceland kind of like that, where you're granted permission to live and work in the country based on your special talent?
That's exactly it. So they granted me work visa and residency visa, obviously, at the same time.
How long was that process from when you applied for the visa to when they said, yes, come full time, be here?
I want to say it was like a year and a half of like prep and applying, submitting, and waiting, if I remember correctly. So I think, yeah, I feel like it was about a year and a half that it was like the whole process, not counting all of the connections I'd been, making years prior. Yeah, it's a
And
commitment.
jump through some hoops to get to the end.
Yeah, definitely. And patience.
So let's dive into what you think the biggest misconception is that you think foreigners
Oh,
have about Iceland.
where do I start? Okay. I hope this doesn't make me sound like a jerk, but I feel like most things people quote unquote know about Iceland, especially before they've ever been here, is most of the time not accurate, honestly, because it's a lot of information that they've gathered off the internet from people that don't live here and have maybe been here once or twice or something for vacation, and then they write blogs, and then they're like, doing all this stuff
The
for
Iceland expert, yeah.
SEO. Yes, exactly. And it's actually it's kind of funny. Like all sometimes I'll read some stuff and I'm like, okay, that location is not the correct name. They misspelled all of this. None of this is correct. So I think there's just a lot of misunderstanding of Iceland as a whole. I think a lot of people feel like it is a fairy tale land, which it looks like it. I get it. It's beautiful and it's something that you don't feel anywhere else, right? So it does have a magic to it, but I think a lot of people forget that people live here. So I think there's this misconception that Iceland is almost like a Disney world, right? And
Theme
so
park country, yeah.
yeah, so people do stuff all the time, like breaking our rules and like things that I'm just like people live here and like you're impeding people right now. But I think that's a big misconception that like you can't just like stand in the middle of the road. Like you might actually get, hit by a car kind of thing. But the other misconceptions I think is that like we eat hot dogs mostly and like there's no like good Icelandic food.
I have seen a lot
That
of blogs mentioning the hot dogs
yeah, that's
as
a
like
tourist
a
thing.
key meal to eat in
No,
Iceland to save
no.
money.
I mean, sure, to save money, yeah, but it's not something that like you might grab a hot dog when you're like on the go or something, or like shopping at like Costco, but that's not like it's not really a thing here as like a local. Like, I mean, yes, locals eat hot dogs, but it's not like the traditional cuisine, if you know what I mean. Like, I think my husband eats like 2 hot dogs a year, you know? Like, I don't know. So I think it's like little things like that.
So when my partner and I went to Iceland for 2 weeks, we actually stopped keeping track of how much we were spending because
Yeah.
we were, spending from euros to
Hmm.
local Icelandic money, and
Hmm.
it just felt extremely expensive. And we went, you
Yeah.
know what? It's better if we just do not track how much we're spending and just focus on
Yeah.
having a good time in this place. When
Yeah.
you live in Iceland, though, do salaries kind of balance out to the cost of living?
I think it depends on, well, one, I think it kind of depends on your perspective a little bit. I'll get into that in a second. And it also depends on your actual job and your role and what you're doing here. So I think for some of the maybe lower paying jobs, like some of the hospitality jobs or something like that, where it's a lot of people that actually just like come here and work seasonally and go back and forth, like hotels and cleaning staff and like stuff like that. It's probably a stretch on in all honesty. But if you have like a degreed skilled job, because the way that the salaries work here is you get paid. So hold on, let me back it up. So like in America, so this is why I mean perspective. So in America, which is my most of my perspective, is you have your national like minimum wage and like that's that. Where here you have a minimum wage like per job title and like per credentials. So like if you are a, university degreed person working in that skill that you have the degree in, or if you have other experience with that degree, then you get bumped up more, right? So like there's a minimum wage per type of job that you have,
Industry, profession, yeah.
industry, yeah, and role and all of that stuff. So I think for those kind, I don't, I personally don't find issue, but I think if you are also eating out all the time, like if you don't have one of the like salaried positions where you're making, like 1.4 million kroner a month kind of thing, then yeah, you probably won't be eating out like every day. And that's not the culture here anyway. It's really a home culture and drinking like alcohol, you kind of do at home, not so much out because it's expensive. So yeah, I personally never had issue. And I think it's less expensive for me living here than when I lived in New York. Um, so yeah.
And what do you eat at home?
Yeah, so well, me or what's common Iceland stuff?
Tell me what you're eating and if it's common Iceland stuff or how you vary that
Yeah,
that
I would
typical
say.
cuisine.
Yeah, I would say I'm kind of a mix because I'm vegetarian, and a lot of Iceland cuisine is meat, like quite meaty. But I do have every morning skyr, which is like a yogurt kind of. It's actually soft cheese, but it's delicious. So I eat that with like berries and stuff. That's pretty normal. And a lot of like breads with like a spread and a cheese on top, like an open face. That's a very like Scandinavian
Yeah,
Nordic
I've seen that
thing.
a lot in Denmark, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, we have with our cuisine a ton of Danish and Norwegian influence because they both owned Iceland before we were independent. So a lot of the like pastries and the like dishes and stuff like that are very influenced still by like Denmark and Norway. And then the like it's funny because when people are like, where do I eat like traditional Icelandic food? And I'm like, you don't want to, because traditional Icelandic food is like fermented meats because there was like, yeah, they were living in turf houses and
The
stuff like that.
Vikings, yeah.
So yeah, exactly. So it's kind of cool because I feel like right now in the past like maybe like 5 to 8 years or something, there's been kind of this like culinary like I don't know culture happening here, where it's a lot of influence from a lot of different places, and what is now like modern like Icelandic food is not the traditional like Danish stuff. So yeah, so like at home, we'll have the open face stuff, the skier. My husband loves to eat like hangikjöt, which is like a smoked meat, lamb, a whole lot of lamb. That is still that's traditional and modern still. Um, and yeah, it's like the typical like meat, veggies, like potatoes is kind of like the traditional thing. I'm ADHD and I'm vegetarian, so I just eat a lot of like mashed potatoes and like fake chicken nuggets and like salads and stuff like that, which is like, quite Icelandic. But when we go out, like there's so much amazing food out there. So yeah.
I remember we did try the fermented shark while we
Yeah.
were in Iceland, and I understood when they gave us this little plate with maybe like five
A
tiny little
cube.
cubes of it and a shot of
Hmm.
some kind of alcohol,
Brennivin.
like
Yeah.
why they give you such a little amount,
Yeah.
because I think we both put a tiny cube in our mouths and I don't think we even swallowed it. So
Yeah.
I
So
think
that's
that's very typical.
Yes, and that's actually a really good example of the thing that people think that locals do, but no local eats that. Like
They
maybe
just
hundreds of
prepare it
years
for the
ago.
tourists.
Yeah, exactly. And I always ruin people's days when I tell them how it's fermented, but maybe I'll leave that off. So if anybody comes here, they can try it and
We
see
can
for
let listeners
themselves.
Google that one, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Steph, I know you're quite an entrepreneur. Is it very difficult for foreigners in Iceland to find work?
I would say yes, mostly because the we're again small, right? So there aren't like probably a million bajillion jobs. However, if you are a skilled worker and you have something that is not easy to find here, then probably not. Like we need like medical staff quite often and like things like that. So maybe not so much, but if you wanted to come here and you didn't have like a master's or a doctorate in something highly specific, and that job is highly specific to what you do, yeah, it is hard. And it's really hard for Americans or people that are not part of the EU. Because I'm sure you know like the hierarchy, right, of how it goes with like finding people for the positions.
Priority
So
for Icelandic people and then priority for EU and then the
yes,
rest of the world? Okay.
yes, exactly. And they have to like prove that there's nobody else in the world that can absolutely do it except for you. So I would say it is, but we have a lot of foreign workers that come over from Poland. We have a very large Polish population here, and Thailand and the Philippines that come over permanent. Some are permanent, some just like come and go that work in restaurants and hospitality and tourism, like, the buses and, all that stuff. So I would say there's a lot of those jobs, but some of them, again, are seasonal. But yeah, if you're not in the EU, you probably you won't be hired for that, like at all.
We spoke earlier about how perhaps the weather has a bit of an influence on
Mm.
people being so creative. What do you do in the dark days of winter? Because Iceland is
Mm.
also a country where in summer you've got like 23, 24 hours of light, and
It's
then in
always
winter
light.
you don't
Mhm.
have a lot of sun.
So again, I like to be like, for me personally, because I'm a very different breed. Like when people ask me why I moved to Iceland and I say the weather, they think I'm joking, and I'm like, no, really. Like I love it. I love the cold. I don't like the sun. I don't like the sun touching me. Yeah. So for me personally, I love the winter. It is so cozy. It doesn't bother me at all that there is very little sunlight. I think it's really like cozy romantic in a way because a lot of people, especially if you have like a perspective where you come from a place where your sun patterns just kind of like do this, year round. A lot of people think that's what it is here. It's just either a lot or like, a very short, but that's not actually what happens. So our sun actually changes like where it is in the sky throughout the whole year, which is really fun. So in the summer, the sun is up the whole day. There's not a time it gets dark at all, which is really great. So the sun kind of does this like little like thing. But in the winter time, it like just comes up above the horizon and then just kind of like falls down again. So it's got this really pretty like pink orangey glow that like bounces off all this really glittery untouched snow, So it's so pretty and I love it. And the holidays, like I'm not Christian. This isn't a Christian nation really. That's a whole other story. But most people aren't religious here, but it's like the culturalness of all of the holidays here, and there are so many holidays in the winter, like so many. So you're always doing different festivals here, and the community just like holds all these different like parties, or you're doing a lot of family time stuff. And like the actual like Christmas season starts in November and basically ends in February. So you have like all these consecutive little fun things that you do. So I love it personally, and you can get cozy. And as an entrepreneur, like that's when I do a lot of my next year planning. So I just like really, I'm a hermit. I just like turn into my little like shell with my blanket, and I love the darkness. I think
It
it's great.
sounds like maybe Icelandic culture is strategic to keep you interested and
Yeah,
engaged during the darkest days of winter. If there's so many
yeah,
activities and things to get involved in, you don't get
there
too much
are.
time to kind of get a bit depressed inside or something.
Yeah, at least for me, like I know there are people that absolutely don't like it. And I know in the immigrant community, I'm always seeing people posting about like, not feeling so well, during the winter and stuff like that. So there are people that don't like it and there are people that get affected. But I don't know. I think there's a lot of Icelandic like attitude is like you just kind of go with the flow. Like the saying is "Feta ratas," just like everything will work out, like it'll all be okay kind of thing. So it's really like that kind of attitude towards the weather and the sun or the not sun. You just kind of like go with the flow and like integrate it into your life, if that makes sense. So it's not. Yeah, I don't find it jarring or anything like that. It's very much like a constant flow here. And yeah, I don't know. I really love it. And we have a lot of indoor like pools and stuff like that. So the pool culture here is huge. So people just go in like hot tubs when it's a blizzard out and things like that, go skiing. It's very active here. People are outside doing activities all year round. So it's very just, I don't know, it's just part of your life, you know? I love it.
I do recall one of our previous guests, Chelsea, who's an American living in Norway,
Mm,
saying that they have a saying there that there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing.
exactly. That's what we say too. Yes,
Okay.
100%. Yeah.
So as long as you're prepared, there should be no reason to not want to enjoy the outdoors at any time of year.
Yeah, exactly. That was actually something that when I moved here, because like in America, I feel like in a lot of places, if it like rains, people will just kind of like stay inside, and like things like that. Like my husband's sister, my husband's Icelandic. His sister moved to the States for a little bit because her husband is doing a fellowship because he's a doctor. And she was actually talking about the cultural differences when she got there, how like because here kids have these like full like bodysuits that they put on with this like face thing. It's like a woolen where just like this part of their face like sticks out, and you
It's
just
like a
like throw them in
onesie with a
this.
hood.
Yeah, exactly. And you just toss them outside. And she said, she was kind of just like culture shocked a little bit that if it was raining or snowing or like anything, people wouldn't want their kids outside. And here it's like you go outside all the time unless it's really windy or dangerous. Then maybe not. But
I also remember a news story. I think it was a couple from Sweden, one of the Scandi countries, that
hmm
left their child in a baby
oh, we do
chariot
that.
pram out the front of a cafe, but like in the
Yes.
States, and someone called the cops, and they had to explain like that culturally
Yes,
this is
that's
what
so
they do.
funny. Yeah. We do that too, and I see that a lot in the because I'm in a lot of like tourist forums and stuff like that because a lot of my clients are tourists. So I just like to have like a good like temperature check of like what people are looking at and like what locations are starting to get popular with the tourists, so I cannot go there anymore with my clients. So I'll see that a lot where they're like. I'm walking by and there's like babies outside. Like, should I call the cops? Is everything okay? And I'm like, oh, that's normal. That's what we do.
So the parents inside enjoying a coffee, and they just leave the
Yeah.
kids out front, like
Yeah.
park like dogs tied up on a leash
Yes.
on a pole,
Yes.
but they're they're just
And then
sitting in
if
their carriers.
yeah, and if they start crying, whoever's walking by will just kind of like knock on the window and like point at the buggy, and then the mom will just, or the dad or the parent or whoever will just come out and grab grab the kid.
Oh, I love that whole community collective like
Yeah,
effort to
very
look
much.
after a child.
Yeah, it is like that. It's really like small here. Like everybody knows everybody. Like everyone's like, I would always joke actually when I first started dating my husband. I was like, "Are you only dating me because we're not related?" Everyone in Iceland's related to you.
Well, with such a small population, I'm not
Mhm.
surprised. And are
Yeah.
there any other notable cultural differences that you had to adapt to when you moved to Iceland?
Well, I grew up in the Midwest, right? So in the Midwest, it's very like you talk to strangers and you smile at people as you pass them. If you are going around them in a grocery store, you'll be like, "Oop," like excuse me, or something like that. And here you don't talk to people unless you know them, generally. You might, if you're on a trail, someone might say like golden eye into you or something as you like pass, but like you don't make eye contact with people on the street. You don't smile at people. So like I would do that at first when I first started coming here out of just habit. Like I don't mean to. If I make eye contact, I smile. And you only do that if you know somebody. So I would get the little look of them trying to remember where they've met me before kind of
Oh
thing.
no.
Yeah, so that I don't do anymore. And in the grocery store, people will just like run into you to like not go around you, just like move into you.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah. At first I would get kind of like this old lady wants to fight me, like what's going on? Especially coming from New York, where it's like you look at someone wrong and they're like, you want to fight? So yeah, that took me a little while to like kind of maneuver around, I guess, a little bit. And there's been a lot of like awesome upgrades I've actually had to like get used to. That as an American, I didn't have as my normal. That yeah, would take me a while. Like my husband would like remind me all the time, like, oh, you have health insurance, go to the doctor, like things like
Of
that. So like
course.
upgrades, that and like the way that the everything is so centralized. So that also was like a really fun upgrade for me to kind of just like get used to with like how the banking works and like we each have our own like pin with the government where everything's just kind of like centralized and based off of your Kanapala. So I had yeah, that stuff actually took me a while to kind of get used to. Having support like you don't have that in the States really, especially as an artist and entrepreneur. Like I didn't have a pension, I didn't have like health insurance. I didn't have, any of these like social nets to catch me kind of thing.
I really like that about France, where I am too,
Mm,
because even just the cultural attitude to unemployment is different here. Like, yes, there's a
yeah,
percentage of French who are considered to be like gaming the system
of,
and
of
claiming
course.
unemployment benefits. But in
Yeah,
general, the attitude here is very much like, oh, well, I pay for this unemployment safety net through my
exactly.
taxes and I'm entitled to use it. Whereas in
Yes.
Australia, the rhetoric really is they're dole bludgers, they're, leeching
Yeah,
off the system. And
yeah.
people don't see it as an entitlement because they work and have paid into the system.
In America, it's very much like, you're basically a loser in society, like you're worthless if you're on unemployment or, like welfare, like, any of these other things. And here it's very much like you've paid for it, it's yours, like it's fine. And
Go and
yeah,
have a
and
sabbatical, go and try to
yeah,
start a business and take a risk or
yeah,
take some time
exactly.
off. Yeah.
Yeah, and like you have to still, like, and most of the people too, that at least that I've seen in conversation that have been on unemployment, they want to work, and they're like, looking for other jobs and stuff like that. And so it's that attitude is totally different here as well, which is great.
So
I've never
refreshing.
personally been on it, but yeah, I think it's great. It's just much more of a yeah, community feel than the States.
Steph, have you mastered the Icelandic language?
Have you
Is
heard
it
it?
possible?
I don't know if it's possible as for me. I don't know. It is so hard. I've taken my classes. I've gone through 3 levels because you also have to do that as your for permanent residency. So I did that to get my permanent residency. I can hear conversation, know what's going on. I can read things, know what's going on. When it comes to speaking it, it's like it is so hard. Like it's so hard. There's so many noises and ways of airflow and the way that your mouth has to be shaped that is just not in English at all. And the inflection is different than English. So it's no, I have not mastered that. I would love to be 100% fluent at some point, obviously. Because I think it's for me personally, it's a respect thing. Like I want to learn their language. You know what I mean? Like I really want to, and I try to speak what I know, but I have a weird accent, so it always goes right to English, so I don't get a whole lot of practice. But yeah, I can hear stuff and read stuff and know what's happening and answer in quite short sentences. But yeah, the mastering, no.
So, do you think it's possible for a foreigner to live in Iceland and never take an Icelandic class and be completely able to function in society?
Yeah, yeah, function, definitely. I think you could function for sure. I know there are a lot of like especially like the seasonal workers and stuff, or people that might be here for a few years and then leave, that don't. Um, However, I do think knowing the language opens you up to more of the culture because there's so much of Icelandic culture that is like I almost feel like this might be a really weird analogy, but it feels like, when people have like an inside joke and you like don't know what's happening, like if you know the language, like you're so much more privy to like the sayings and stuff like that. And there's a lot of words that just don't translate into English and stuff like that. So I think if you know the language, it opens you up to just more of the community and, more of the culture for sure. If you don't know any, you would totally get by. Most people here, everyone here, unless they're like maybe like two generations up, everyone speaks English. So it's not hard. And a lot of people that work where you would be going day to day, like restaurants, bars, grocery stores, a lot of people there are foreign workers as well. So some don't speak Icelandic at all. Obviously, some Icelanders work in those positions too. But yeah, so you can totally get by.
Here in France, there are rules about using French first on things like menus, and even if you have
Yeah,
any English words in like printed ads that come in the mail, they need to have the French translation written in small words somewhere on the
yeah.
flyer as well. Is that similar in Iceland? Do they switch between Icelandic and English for things like official communications, or do you just have to figure it out with a translate app?
Yeah, no, it's still Icelandic. So they will have for something, especially if it's like a part of the government that deals with immigrants, they will have like an Icelandic, English, and Polish like versions of the websites and stuff like that. But like it's cool because now, like just now, is when they're really getting like a big influx of foreigners. So this is really the first time in their history, that they've had to talk to and communicate with people regularly that don't speak Icelandic. So there's starting to be things like our national news. It's like always in English, I mean in Icelandic, but they opened up. It's called RÚV, so they did like a Ruve English, so you can like get the news and stuff in English as well. And there's been some talks as of late, I would say the past like 6 months or so that I've started to hear about it, of this conversation actually coming up of like how are we going to preserve our language and how are we going to actually make it more accessible for immigrants to learn the language because that's part of the issue, right? And I think as an immigrant, a lot of people want to learn the language, but we are working adults. So it's like, when do you have time? Like when I was going to school, it was really, really hard on my brain, really hard, because it would be after work and it would be, like my brain's already fried from what I've been doing during the day. And so a lot of people, and I don't have kids, so I was able to do that. But if you are a working parent or, something like that, like how do you learn this language? So there's actually a lot of conversation happening now around like how do we make it more accessible and how do we kind of like keep it alive, but also integrate, all these new people that don't speak it. So we do have on a lot of our signs are just Icelandic, but then if it's for tourists or something like that, it's Icelandic and then English. So when people are like talking, to answer the second part of your question, they don't flip back and forth from like Icelandic to English or anything, unless it's a saying that isn't a traditional Icelandic saying. So they'll be speaking Icelandic. Am I allowed to curse on here? I don't know.
Yeah,
Okay,
no,
yeah,
go.
they'll be like speaking something in Icelandic, and then they'll be like, oh, and then like, go back into Icelandic or like something like that. So
Because there's no O
they,
in Icelandic, or it's not the same.
I think it's more of the context and like how they're saying it and the not to like mock English speakers, but it's more of just like a different way to say it, if that makes sense. So yeah, so they'll pop back and forth a little bit in that way. But if it's yeah, at least in my experience, if I'm around Icelanders and they're speaking Icelandic, they're just speaking Icelandic, unless it's a one-off something. Yeah.
We spoke about the dark winter months. How about those glorious 24 hours of daylight? Because when we were in Iceland, it was extremely bizarre to have the sun still out at 3 o'clock in the morning. We also came during what I believe was a summer heat wave because people were out on their balconies, like sunning
Yeah.
themselves, and people were getting around without a sweater. And that was like 15, maybe 19 degrees max.
So that's a cultural thing. So that's what you do when the sun comes out. I personally don't because I don't like the sun to touch me, but my husband, as soon as like the sun comes out, the like Icelandic thing to do, you take your shirt off. Maybe not the ladies, maybe they'll have, something else on, though we don't really care. Nudity is not a thing here. Like we don't care. But you take your shirt off, you take your shoes off, and you just lay in the grass somewhere, or you like lay somewhere to like soak up the sun. So like
Get
all
that
summer
vitamin
long, if we're
D.
outside hiking or
Yeah.
something, my husband will just take his
Even
shirt
if
off
it's
just to
only
like get
13
some sun.
degrees.
So that's like a cultural thing. Yeah, exactly. Less so heat wave. Yeah, oh yeah, that's warm. He has like specific shorts for like when it gets to like 10 degrees. He's like, "Oh yeah, short weather." So yeah, but I loved the all day sun. At first it was kind of trippy to be in it all the time. Like my first maybe like 2 summers that I lived here, uh, I would just be on the couch and be like, I'm kind of tired. I don't really know why. I'd be like, oh, it's 2 a.m. It's not actually like, yeah, I had no idea. But now it's like, I personally, I don't even notice it because everybody has blackout curtains and you sleep with the sleeping mask. And I don't even notice. But I love getting up. My body gets up at 5 a.m. every morning, just how it is. So I love it in the summer because the sun's already out and I walk along the sea every morning. So it's really nice because it looks like noon, but nobody is out and it's great. So yeah, I like that adventuring because you can adventure at like, midnight. Nobody's out as far as tourists go.
Obviously, a lot of people go to Iceland for the nature, and there's been a lot covered in recent years about the problem of over tourism. Some of Iceland's most iconic
Hmm.
spots just being overrun and damaged because
Yeah.
of tourists and not respecting the
Hmm.
nature. So, what's your advice to people that really want to come to Iceland but don't want to
Yeah.
contribute to the problems that locals are having with over tourism? How do you strike that balance as being a respectful visitor?
I love that you asked me that. I'm actually about to start a project on this because I'm like, so let me preface this with I fully believe that there's more people that like want to do good, but they're just unaware than people that don't give a shit, right? So I think if you care and you want to be mindful of our clients, so this is the thing. Our ground is always wet. We don't have a lot of sunlight throughout the years, and our everything's very fragile because of that, right? So some tips that I would have is to, if you're at some of the popular locations, or any location actually that has a trail, stay on the trails because the a lot of the damage actually comes from the feet, right? Kicking up moss and stuff like that. And our ground can't take a whole lot of feet happening. So stay on the trails, stay behind the ropes. The ropes are there to protect either you or to protect the flora and fauna. So just stay behind the ropes. Like you won't get a better photo if you step over the ropes. So just stick to that. Obviously take in whatever you take in, like take out. I see a lot of people leaving trash and like number
Mm.
twos out and just don't do that. That's
I
awful.
have heard that Iceland is building more
So
toilets at these places, which
they
personally I'm
they
happy about.
are. I actually, yeah. They are, which is great. So this is the thing I think that a lot of people don't understand about Iceland is all of our land is either owned by the government, like a national park, or it's privately owned. So like even like Skoafoss is on a private farm. So a lot of these amazing locations that people go to, even Reynisfjara, the quote unquote black sand beach, like that's a farm, right? And so people opened up these locations because they're so beautiful for people to see. So I think a lot of people don't realize that these aren't like national parks, and that's why like there aren't facilities and stuff like that. So the boom of tourism actually happened very quickly. So I think some of these like farmers and stuff like that, that's why there's been parking fees that have started to come into play at some of these places, and it is so they can build facilities and stuff like that for people. So A tip there is just don't pass up a gas station. Like we have so many gas stations and little convenience stores and stuff like that. And the attitude here is not like it is in the States, where if you walk in and ask to use the restroom, they like look at you like you're a jerk and they're like, buy something first. It's not like that here. So just use the restroom if you're passing it. Just do that instead of waiting until you're out in the nature. Because also, so many of our locations you hike to, so you can't really have like, a facility like in the middle of literally nowhere. But I actually have a friend who is working right now on a circular um, restroom project, and my mother-in-law is like consulting her on it to get these like circular not economy, but what's it called? Circular no waste
Leave no
toilets
trace.
like
Yeah.
up and around, which would
Like,
be
so
yeah,
that
which would
you
be
carry
really
a toilet
cool.
with you, or it's like compostable?
No, yeah, so it's like a toilet out in nature, but it's a they it uses the waste
Okay.
for other things, which would be
Yeah.
really cool. So that's just happening. But yeah, that's what I would say. I would say do that stuff first, and for protection at least of our nature.
But you don't think it's a matter of people needing to stop coming to Iceland? Iceland doesn't necessarily want to stop tourism.
I I don't think it should stop tourism totally. Like it is a beautiful place. It is something that is our number one moneymaker also. And I think we need it. I personally, this is just my personal views. Take what you want from it. I think that there should be a higher tourist tax on a lot of things. And I also, because the thing is like us locals are also footing the bill for all of this. So there's like 2.3 to 2.4 million tourists a year, and there's only like 300,000 and some change of us. And so like we're really footing the bill for like the extra garbage and like, all this other stuff. So I think having some kind of different structure where there is some different tourist
Mm,
tax would be great. And I actually think it could be beneficial to limit the amount of tourists a year that do come here, similar to how some of the national parks in the US have like, the permit system, or a
mm.
lottery
And Venice
system
is
kind of
doing that
thing.
now
I'm
too. They're
sure a lot
doing
of,
like a daily cap on
yeah,
entrance, and you have to pay.
I think that's the only way I can think of. But I do think that we could handle less to let it heal a little bit. Um, and also too, just the roads get so busy. Like in the summer, I get stuck in like in like traffic, and I'm like, what is this?
Go
What
home.
is happening? So like things like that too. Yeah, I'm like, just stay in your cabin for a day. Yeah, so things like that I think would be helpful. And also, lastly, before I step off of my soapbox, the cruise ships, I personally think should just not happen
Right. I
personally
completely forgot
here.
you have cruise ships coming around.
Personally. We have so many, and it's like thousands of people like coming into these tiny fishing towns. Even here in Reykjavik, it's overpowering. I live by the ports, and it's really, really overpowering. Like so many people, and it kind of sucks because it takes away, I think, some of the beauty of why people live here and pay to live here, and it's expensive to live here, and like I don't know, I can't like go into my bakery that I usually go into, and like a lot of tourists, again, back to the whole people live here, like this isn't a make-believe place. They're quite dare I say rude? I get hit a lot and like walked into like on the sidewalk a lot, and like they walk in our bike lanes and people are like, have the bell because they're trying to get to work, like those kinds of things. I think also too, if you want to be like respectful when you're here, just sort of like see what the flow is and like, stick with the flow and like don't walk in bike lanes and like run red lights and things like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
completely. Being a
Okay, so
respectful visitor is so important. Finally,
it is so important.
Steph, I'm
Yes.
curious about, I mean, you mentioned that your husband is Icelandic, but what else keeps you in the
Mm.
country and not, for example, deciding to
Oh.
repatriate to the States?
can I just say everything? Like, I'm so in love with Iceland. Like, so in love with it. I love what it affords me, like my peace, my it's so weird. I actually remember the moment that I stopped having anxiety and I was like staring at the ocean and realized I didn't have this feeling that I just thought was just normal. Like I just love the peace that it affords me. Like I cannot picture leaving. And my work, like a big part of what I do, like I'm a photographer, but I'm also a coach and I hold retreats and I get to take people to like these epic locations and help them with transformations and like help them with like all this stuff that like I couldn't do in the States because the nature here is just like I don't even know how to describe it. Like once you're in it, you've been here. Once you're in it and you like feel that like power and oneness with like the universe, as woo-woo as that sounds, like
It's
I can't
definitely a
do
bit
that
woo
anywhere
woo.
else.
Yeah.
I just
Like,
love it.
yeah, there's definitely just,
It is
there's a
woo-woo.
vibe in Iceland,
Something.
in the nature.
Yeah, a
It's the vibe.
vibe.
And you don't, I've never
Exactly.
felt
It's
it
a
anywhere else.
vibe.
Yeah.
No, me either. And like each location, it's funny because like when I'm creating these like different experiences, so whether it's like photography clients or coaching clients, if I'm doing like a bespoke experience, I have this questionnaire where I ask them like specific questions to figure out like different feelings. And then I match the feelings to different locations because they all have like different vibes and feelings, you know? So like, yeah, I just love it. I cannot imagine ever, and I'll never go back. I'm a permanent resident. I'm never going back. Like, everything keeps me here. I love the culture. I love literally everything. I have a husband. We own a house. I have roots here, of course. But like aside from that, like I just I'm so in love with the country. I will never
Well,
leave.
Steph, thanks so much for coming on the Expat Focus podcast to talk all things Iceland and
Yes,
your perspective as an American in
of
Iceland.
course.
That's it for today. If Nordic countries are on your radar, you're going to enjoy my chat with Chelsea, who offers 10 tips for integrating into life in Norway. Just roll through our podcast episodes on our website, expatfocus.com, to find it, or through your favorite podcast app. Be sure to sign up to our monthly newsletter to never miss a new episode, and I'll catch you next time.